You're not wearing that to the rehearsal dinner, are you? My mom's voice sliced through the already tense air like a blade. I was standing in the guest room mirror, tugging gently at the hem of the only decent dress I had left in my suitcase. And it was ruined. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where are you from and from which city you're watching our videos? And after watching the whole video, don't forget to tell us what would you do in this situation? Be honest, tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin.
All my clothes had holes in them.
Precise, deliberate slashes, just big enough to be unwearable, just cruel enough to make me question my sanity. The moment I'd lifted the lid of my luggage that morning, I knew it wasn't an accident. The tears were too clean, too intentional. Now she stood behind me, arms folded, the same smug tilt to her chin she wore when I was 8, and she'd told me, "You'll never be as pretty as your cousin Charlotte." This, she said, gesturing toward the shredded fabric dangling from my hands, actually suits you better than what you usually wear. Makes a statement.
Desperate.
Honest. I turned slowly. My voice was low but steady. Why would you do this? My mom didn't blink. You always make everything about you, Hannah. It's your brother's weekend. Maybe it's time you accepted your place. My Aunt Carol cackled from the doorway, wine glass in hand at 11 in the morning. She's right, sweetie. Honestly, maybe with a few holes in your dress, some desperate man might finally take pity on you. Might even find a date, huh? They laughed like I wasn't even in the room. They didn't know. No one in that house, not my brother Brandon, not my dad, not the cousins or even the bride-to-be, knew the one thing I'd kept hidden for over a year. I was already married. And not just married, secretly married to a billionaire who chose to stay out of the spotlight. By my choice. I wanted to protect our peace. I didn't want my toxic family leeching off him the way they leeched off each other. But that decision came with a price. They still saw me as the failure, the invisible one, the burden, the plain daughter who had settled into a life of mediocrity, as my mom once phrased it. I hadn't told them about Nathaniel for a reason. But today, I wasn't sure I could keep it in anymore. Because he was coming. Not because I asked him to. Not because I cried on the phone. But because when I told him my mom slashed my clothes and mocked me to my face, he simply said, "Send me the address." That was 4 hours ago. Now, I sat on the edge of my twin bed in the dusty upstairs guest room, the same room they made me sleep in as a kid whenever relatives visited, wearing a t-shirt I found at the bottom of my suitcase and jeans with holes I didn't remember buying. The rehearsal dinner was in 3 hours. The house was chaos. Hair dryers blasting. Bridesmaids yelling. My brother laughing too loudly downstairs, trying too hard to show off for his fiancée's family. None of them noticed I hadn't come down since the incident. None of them noticed I'd gone silent. None of them knew what was about to walk through that front door. When the doorbell rang, my mother shouted from the kitchen without looking up, "Hannah, get the door. You're not doing anything useful anyway." I walked down slowly, deliberately, and then I opened it. There he stood, 6'2", broad-shouldered, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and a jawline sharp enough to slice egos in half. His brown eyes scanned me first, noting my torn jeans, the faded t-shirt, the raw tension in my jaw, then drifted inside the house. His gaze cooled. "Are you okay?" he asked, quietly enough that only I could hear. I nodded once, swallowed hard. "You came," I whispered. He leaned forward and kissed my cheek. "Of course I came." Then he stepped inside. My aunt was the first to spot him. She dropped her glass on the floor, the sound of shattering crystal breaking the hum of conversation like a gunshot. My mother turned, ready to scold, until she saw who had just entered her house. And her face
went pale.
Nathaniel offered his hand, calm and commanding. Nathaniel Ward, Hannah's husband. The room stilled. The room froze. My mom blinked, mouth parting, but no words came. My brother stood mid-step at the stairs, staring like he was trying to process whether this was a prank. My dad, who never looked up from his newspaper, lowered it an inch and stared. I watched it all in silence. Every smirk, every cruel joke, You'll die alone, whispered behind my back. It all died in that moment, right there on their faces. Nathaniel didn't stop there. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a tiny velvet box, handed it to me like it was nothing. I opened it slowly. Inside was a replacement dress. A tag from a designer my mom used to say was for real women, not people like you. I know what they did, he said, still facing my mother. I'll be taking Hannah shopping later. But for tonight, I thought you might like this one. Silence. You could hear the air conditioning hum. Then, softly, he added, I don't tolerate people hurting my wife. Not with words. Not with scissors. And just like that, he wrapped an arm around my waist, kissed the side of my head, and said, Come on, babe. Let's get ready. We've got a wedding to ruin. The silence behind us was delicious. But the story was just getting started. Because Nathaniel had one more plan. And it involved tomorrow. At the wedding. Where he'd make sure no one in my family, no one, would ever look at me the same again. The sun had already started to set when we arrived at the rehearsal dinner venue. It was a fancy waterfront restaurant my family rented out just to impress the bride's wealthy parents. Every table had champagne glasses already poured, every seat had gold-trimmed place cards, and every person inside already had an opinion about me. Except this time, they weren't laughing. Nathaniel didn't let go of my hand once. Heads turned the moment we walked in. Conversations dropped off mid-sentence. I caught glimpses of widened eyes, the subtle nudges between relatives who had never once asked how I was doing over the last 2 years. My cousin Charlotte's jaw was practically on her plate. My brother's fiancé blinked at us like we'd walked in wearing Halloween costumes. My brother, Brandon, was standing by the head table. When he saw us, his face tightened. I could tell he didn't recognize Nathaniel at first. Not until one of the groomsmen leaned in and whispered something. Then his expression changed fast. Is that? I heard someone mutter behind us. Nathaniel pulled out a chair for me. Quietly.
Casually.
Then sat beside me like he owned the place. My mom hadn't said a word since the front door earlier. She walked in 5 minutes after us, red in the face and moving like someone who had just had the rug pulled out from under her. She sat across the room with Aunt Carol and didn't even look in our direction.
It was awkward.
But it was glorious. Just when things were beginning to settle, the microphone screeched. Brandon stood at the head of the room, grinning nervously. All right, everyone, let's get this started. First of all, thank you all for being here. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. But tonight's for laughter, for love, and for family. I saw his eyes flick to me for just a second. His smile twitched. And since we're all together, he continued, why not start with a little story about my amazing sister, Hannah? Nathaniel shifted in his seat. Brandon raised his champagne glass. Hannah, the girl who once tripped over her own shoelace at my middle school graduation and took down the cake table. You remember that, right? A few awkward chuckles around the room. I didn't say a word. Brandon grinned wider.
Don't worry, sis.
We're not expecting you to make a scene this time. Though, I gotta say, the outfit's bold. The room rippled with uneasy laughter. Nathaniel stood. Calmly. Confidently. The room went dead quiet. Actually, he said, voice even. If anyone here owes someone a toast, it's me. Brandon blinked. Nathaniel continued. To Hannah, who stood strong when others mocked her, who held her head high when her own family tried to humiliate her, and who, despite everything, has more class in one ruined dress than some people have in their entire overpriced suit. Aunt Carol choked on her drink. Nathaniel raised his glass. To my wife. And to knowing your worth, even when the people closest to you forget it. He clinked his glass against mine. The silence was louder than the toast. And then Brandon muttered, Wait, wife. Someone gasped. My mother dropped her fork. Nathaniel glanced around the room and spoke again, quieter this time.
Yes.
I'm Hannah's husband. I wanted to meet her family before tomorrow, but it seems I already have. He sat down like nothing happened. My brother stood there, frozen. His fiancée tugged at his sleeve, whispering something urgent. My mom looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. And me? I just smiled and took a sip of my champagne, because they still had no idea what was coming tomorrow. Not yet, but soon, very soon. The morning of the wedding started with chaos. Bridesmaids rushing in silk robes, groomsmen pretending not to be hungover, makeup artists, flower arrangements, and tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I stayed quiet in the corner room of the hotel suite, alone. No one invited me to the bridal prep suite. No one texted to check in. Not even Brandon. Nathaniel had left early to make a few arrangements. He kissed my forehead before he walked out and said only 4 words. Be ready by noon. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. His calm confidence had become my anchor. Whatever he was planning, I trusted him with it. At exactly 11:45 a.m., there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find a tall woman in a black pantsuit holding a sleek, white garment bag. She smiled and said, "From Mr. Ward." Inside was a custom, floor-length gown in a deep sapphire blue, silk, structured, stunning. It hugged every inch of me, in all the right ways. The neckline dipped tastefully. The back shimmered. There was a pair of heels, earrings, and even a subtle diamond bracelet in the box. There was also a note. They tried to make you look small. Today, we remind them who you are. I dressed in silence. At exactly noon, a luxury black car pulled up. The driver opened the door with a quiet Mrs. Ward. I stepped in, heart pounding. The venue was a massive estate on the edge of a private lake, all glass, gold accents, and polished floors. Guests were already arriving. Rows of chairs lined the lawn. Photographers fluttered like birds. As I walked across the gravel path toward the main garden, heads began to turn again. They saw me before they saw him. And when they saw him, coming up the steps behind me in a dark suit and shades, they finally understood. Nathaniel wasn't just handsome. He wasn't just rich. He was the reason sponsors had pulled out of Brandon's startup last year. He was the quiet investor behind the firm that outbid Brandon for that downtown office space. And he was the man whose tech company had just been featured in Forbes as the fastest-growing private firm in the U.S. My brother turned ghost white. He walked over slowly, pulling at his collar. "Hannah," he said through gritted teeth, "what the hell is going on?" Nathaniel stepped forward. "Let me help you understand." He pulled out a small envelope. "This is a contract your startup signed last year. You were so desperate for funding you didn't look closely at the fine print." Brandon snatched the envelope and scanned it. "Clause 3.2, Nathaniel said. "If your revenue drops below projections by 35% within 6 months, controlling interest transfers to the silent investor." My brother's mouth fell open.
No.
"That's not." "It is." I stepped forward now, voice steady. "And guess who that investor was?" Brandon looked between us. Nathaniel didn't even blink. "Me." The blood drained from Brandon's face. "You bought out my company?" "No," Nathaniel said coldly.
She did.
"I just made the paperwork possible." I could see my mom approaching now, fast. "You can't do this," she snapped. "This is Brandon's big day." I turned slowly. "I didn't ruin anything," I said. "I just showed up. Something you taught me never to do." Then I looked straight at my Aunt Carol, who had just appeared next to my mother, visibly rattled. "And maybe," I added, "you should have picked a different hobby than ripping at my clothes. Because karma stitches faster than you think." My words hung in the air like thunder. And for the first time in years, no one had anything to say back. But the day wasn't over. Nathaniel hadn't even revealed the real surprise yet. That was still to come, right before the ceremony, when everyone would have no choice but to listen. The ceremony began right on time. Despite the tension, despite the rumors now swirling between relatives like wildfire, Brandon stood tall beneath the archway of white roses. His fiancée, Danielle, looked perfect, almost too perfect. Her smile was fixed, her posture military straight. But her eyes kept flicking toward us.
Toward me.
And Nathaniel. Rows of guests turned in their seats when we approached. We didn't sneak in quietly. We walked down the center aisle like we belonged there because we did. I wasn't hiding anymore. Nathaniel held my hand. And this time I didn't let go either. We took our seats in the second row. My mother sat 3 chairs away, her body stiff, lips pressed into a tight line. Aunt Carol didn't even glance at us. But the bridesmaids? All whispering. The groomsmen? Uneasy. Even the wedding planner kept checking her headset, like she could sense something was about to go wrong. She wasn't wrong. Just as the officiant cleared his throat to begin, a soft, "Excuse me," came from behind. Everyone turned. A young man in a gray suit stepped forward, holding a clipboard and a badge. He handed something to Brandon, then whispered quickly in his ear. Brandon's eyes widened. Danielle leaned in, whispering sharply. He shook his head, then looked directly at me. "What the hell is this?" he called out suddenly. Whispers rippled through the audience. Nathaniel stood up.
Calmly. Smoothly.
"That," he said, "is a legal document confirming that, effective today, the venue, the event sponsor, and even your media rights belong to a trust." Brandon blinked. "A what?" "A trust," Nathaniel repeated, sliding his hand into his pocket. "Owned by my wife." The gasps were loud this time. I stood, my voice quiet but firm. "You see, while you all were busy mocking me, I was building. And everything you used to brag about owning? The rights to the photos? The streaming? Even the lakefront branding you sold to guests? It's all mine now." Danielle turned pale. "Wait, our wedding video?" "Mine," I replied. She stepped forward, her voice cracking. This was supposed to go live on a luxury bridal network. Nathaniel stepped between us, his tone clipped. "Not anymore." Brandon's fists clenched. "Why would you do this? On my day?" I looked at him, really looked at him. "You mean the day you and Mom tried to humiliate me? The day you told people I was an embarrassment? The day my own clothes were destroyed just to keep me from looking decent in front of your friends?" Silence. Nathaniel added, "You tried to erase her. We made sure that wouldn't happen again." Then, right on cue, the venue's large outdoor projector screen, the one set to play their rehearsal dinner highlights, flickered on. Only instead of the wedding video, it played security footage. Footage of my mom,
Sitting in my guest room.
slashing holes in my dresses with scissors. My aunt laughing beside her. A few relatives gasped. Danielle backed away from Brandon. He turned to my mother. Did you actually?" She stammered. "It was just a joke. A petty joke." The projector cut again. And then footage of Brandon, laughing with his friends about how nobody would ever want Hannah, while Danielle smirked in the background. The room didn't gasp this time. It went silent. I didn't cry.
I didn't yell.
I didn't run. I just stood there, steady. Nathaniel gently placed a hand on my back, a quiet signal that it was over. But I wasn't finished. "Brandon," I said, voice even, "you may still get married today. But from this day forward, everything you built, every connection you bragged about, is now tied to me." Then I turned to my mother. "And you? You always said I'd never be anything. But it turns out I was the one protecting you. Because if Nathaniel had shown up a year ago, your face wouldn't just be red. It'd be in court." Her lips parted. No sound came out. And with that, I turned back toward the aisle. We didn't wait for the ceremony to resume. We didn't need to. As we walked away, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I'd finally arrived. And for the first time in my life. They all knew it too. It had been 2 weeks since the wedding that wasn't. Danielle didn't walk down the aisle that day. Not after the footage. Not after the entire room watched the groom-to-be stand exposed, pride crushed in front of both families. The wedding was called off. Publicly, it was a mutual decision. Privately, Danielle moved out of Brandon's condo within 48 hours. The brand partnership for the televised ceremony was pulled. The bridal blog that had sponsored them published a brutal exposé instead. When love meets arrogance, a wedding torn apart by secrets and scissors. I didn't do interviews. I didn't post statements. I just watched them all scatter like rats off a sinking ship. And I stayed quiet. Until the letter arrived. It was a plain envelope. No return address. Slipped under the door of our penthouse apartment like a ghost had delivered it. Nathaniel found it first. He placed it on the marble counter unbothered. "You want me to open it?" he asked. No, I said. I'll read it. Inside was my mother's handwriting. It wasn't long. Hannah, I never thought I'd write this. Not because I'm too proud, but because I never expected you'd rise above us. I always saw you as the leftover child, the one who didn't shine, the one who made things awkward. I never admitted it, but I think part of me resented how good you were, how kind, how forgiving. I mocked you because it made me feel stronger, because I didn't want to admit I was afraid you'd leave us behind.
And you did.
You left. And I see now that you were never the weak one. You were just quietly strong. And I hated you for it.
I'm sorry, Mom.
I read it twice. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel something, but because that version of me, the one who used to break down at the smallest scraps of affection from her, didn't exist anymore. Nathaniel leaned in. Do you believe it? I thought for a long second. I believe she regrets the consequences, I said. Not the actions. He nodded slowly. So, what do you want to do? I folded the letter and slid it into a drawer. I want to live well and keep the door closed. He pulled me into his arms, pressed his lips to my forehead, and whispered, Then that's what we'll do. 6 months later, I stood on a stage in San Francisco. The spotlight was hot, the applause loud. I was being honored for launching an empowerment fund for young women in tech, a fund Nathaniel helped me build, but made sure I got the credit for. The same girl who was once told she was invisible now had her own segment on a national finance podcast. But more than that, I had peace. I had love. And I had me back. Not the me my family tried to label. Not the me they humiliated. But the woman who had quietly, patiently, and powerfully taken her power back. Because revenge wasn't about screaming or slamming doors. It was about showing up in silence and letting your success speak loud enough for the whole room to hear. And mine? It was roaring.